team and talking about Pytheas. Our concept is that Pytheas is a cosmic terror VR game for those willing to descend into madness. You are the lone person awake on a stranded starship, and it's up to you to save the passengers by restarting the ship's systems. You'll need to solve puzzles and complete objectives to unlock new sections of the ship, all while descending into madness while fighting post-cryo madness. And what is post-cryo madness, you might ask? It is a severe psychotic illness known to affect deep space travelers after long journeys in hypersleep. Some of the symptoms include hallucinations, delusions, and extreme paranoia. What we really want the player to experience is that questioning of the reality, what's real and what's imaginary, and those are some of the things that we've really focused on when developing this game from a gameplay standpoint. Now the premise, as we've already talked about, is that you're aboard this starship and you're required to bring these systems back online while fighting PCM, post-cryo madness. But something that's unbeknownst to the player is that there's actually a hidden narrative. This starship to another world has actually been created by a Canaanite cult, which is an actual ancient religion that was before Christianity, and they are on a mission to capture an egg in deep space and sacrifice the inhabitants aboard the ship in order to birth this monster that is aboard the starship Pytheas. The gameplay loop is that there's an onboard AI computer that is tasking you with the objectives on each level, and you have to restore power to each of the levels, and after you restore the power, you're solving puzzles that will unlock objectives that you need to complete that will further unlock new sections of the starship. The madness mechanic, and while managing the sanity, and the sanity relates back to the madness mechanic. While you're exploring this ship and completing the objectives, you're going to encounter what we're calling haunts, but they're really just aspects that scare the player. And as you get scared, you start to lose sanity, and if you lose too much sanity, you'll actually be transported into quarantine and be locked in there until you can complete a quick test, which is similar to the I am not a robot type test that you've seen before. Now the level design is something that was a little bit of difficulty for us early on in the semester, but we came up with a good solution. The starship that we've developed has 3 different sections, and each section are stacked vertically, and there are multiple levels on each of the different sections also stacked vertically. They have different types of levels, and for this semester we've been focusing on the cryo chamber laboratory level. And each of the layouts of the levels are very similar, so once we can figure out one, we should be able to replicate it further on down. The player operates in a space that is confined as a circle, and within those spaces there's multiple rooms that kind of shoot off, but the player isn't actually going into the rooms. They need to have VR goggles that they put on inside of VR, again going back into the questioning of a reality, to be able to solve the objectives. Now, in terms of the design updates, one of the early things that we did was we created a demo and we tested it out among about 40 individuals, and one of the biggest pain points was that the players' actual interaction with the space was very difficult for them, so we developed what we're calling magnet hands, which is a concept of having the controllers actually be within the game and have the player interact using the controllers, but they're an in-game asset as well. And that asset allows the player to charge up power locations, manipulate objects, and as well as provide illumination. Some of the other things that we've developed over this course of the semester are the door puzzles and some of the objectives. And some of the areas that we really need to focus in on are the second objective for the first level, as well as incorporating the scares and the narrative clues for the player. And here's one of the examples of the door puzzle mechanics. So we have our magnet hand, we have the sliders that the player can manipulate using magnet hands. But how do you replicate this Canaanite symbol? It's very difficult, so what we did is we started to simplify and paper test, and then eventually gray box it, and now we've got it incorporated as a rough element into one of the door puzzles. Engineering update. We've done a great job about really building out that design mechanic and making it feel immersive for the player, and the 3 aspects I already talked about have been incorporated. The puzzle mechanics, the slider was something that gave us a little bit of a issue early on, and we came up with a good solution that has that compelling gameplay element. And then the madness mechanic has been completed, and you're going to see just a brief image of that within the demo, but that's already been completed. Other areas that we need to focus on are object drag. With the magnet hands, that poses some difficult issues for us. We want to really solve the player's UI as it relates to having a helmet on, and because there is a lot of issues with motion sickness in VR, and then the madness effects on the player. We have the mechanic complete, but how it's affecting the player is something we want to build out as well. We're also experimenting with how to incorporate IK for the player's arm, so that again it adds to that immersive emphasis. So for the art update, we've got a lot of concept arts down the pipeline, and a lot of it's already been created, including the control room quarantine and the modular assets that we're using to build up the levels. The concept art is already being rendered in 3D, and we have a couple of areas that we need to work on for the rest of the semester, including the other side of the level, which is the laboratory, and then some of the important assets like the AI computer that we need to render and add into the level as well. And here's just a screenshot of the process of taking some inspiration, doing the concept work, and then building it out, and you'll see that in a second as part of the demo. So for the audio updates, we really have a lot of demo that we did for that earlier demo that we worked on, but I haven't begun incorporating it into the yeah, sorry, the demo's not actually playing. And as part of that, we have to determine whether or not we're going to incorporate music in the actual gameplay, or in what aspects, if it's going to be diegetic or non-diegetic. And there's a lot of dialogue that we have to re-record. Some of it was recorded earlier, but that's more of a sample that we haven't incorporated yet, because the tasks haven't been written out from a narrative standpoint. But the next step for us is the world sound effects, which includes the magnet hands and the player in action that can also be used for the madness mechanic. Let's take a look at the demo, and if you guys can turn around and take a look at the screen behind you. Adam will be demoing it, and what you're going to see is the player's going to start out in the control center, which is where the player will start out all the levels, because that's what's going to move the player up and down vertically inside of the starship. And what you're going to see is that Adam is going to restore power to the level, and then is going to go to the cryo chamber and complete the first objective, or attempt to complete the first objective. Okay, so what you see is that he spawned in the center of the control center, and there's a T-shaped room. So one part of the T is the controls to be able to move the elevator down further into the ship, and he is in the charging section of the ship. And as you can see, there's a panel over here that the player will have to use the charge mechanic for the magnet hands to restore power. And he's going to activate his magnet hands. Both of them need to touch the control center to charge up the station. But as soon as it's charged up, power is restored, and now we can continue on. If you notice, before Adam walked towards the control station, that puzzle that was on the door didn't have a clue that populated, so it'd be really difficult to be able to solve that without having the station charged. So you can see that there's a hint off to the side, and using the object drag, the left hand can only drag the same color hand, and the blue hand, the right hand can only drag associated color as well, and a purple bar can be dragged by either hand. We see Adam is working on trying to match the object, and he did, so he's unlocked the door. Now the player can choose either the left or right. Left will take you down to the laboratory section, the right side will take you towards the cryo chambers. And again, this is just a gray box, but the art assets are modular, so these are fairly representative of what we use. Now we see a cryo chamber that looks to be a fully functioning cryo chamber. All the pods are green, stand in as we develop the art, and you can see there's some mechanical crane above it that's that we may or may not have aspects. Okay, so we see a set of goggles. Now in the next version of this, there will be another door puzzle that the player will have to complete to release the goggles. But for the sake of this one, the goggles transport the player into another room that we see the same charge buttons as before. So we're going to go ahead and illuminate that to be able to see what's going on and charge up. And we see that there's a cryo chamber, but it appears to have something wrong with it. And what we see is some controls in front of us, and those controls are operating a mechanical arm within the cryo chamber. Now Adam's going to do his best to try to move that arm to where that red cryopod that seems to be damaged is located at. And you see the countdown is clicking down, and the arm is going to pick up whatever's underneath it. And, uh-oh. We grabbed the wrong pod. That is not good. Okay, what's going to happen to this? That's a living cryopod right there. There's somebody that's alive in that pod. So where's it going to go? Oh no, what's that in the back? Okay, use your imaginations. Imagine that that's a vat of chemicals. And, oh boy, that's not good. Oh, so what just happened? Oh man, we did a horrible thing, and we immediately lost all of our sanity because we just killed a live member of our crew, and we are locked inside of quarantine. Now, from here on, you'll notice that inside of quarantine, if you can turn around, Adam, and kind of look at quarantine space for us, and look up. So in that space is where you'll take your post-cryo madness test that will allow you to be released from quarantine and try the puzzle again. So thank you for your attention during our demo. That's, oh, there we go. That's all right, what questions can I answer? Well, we have some mood music.
You just dropped in your bag, killer.
Yeah, one of your buddies, right?
Have you noticed like an extreme amount of discomfort? Because I notice you do a lot of movement using the controllers rather than actually physically moving. And if so, have you experimented with possibly including things like blinders on sort of the sides of the vision field?
Yeah, that's the next step for the helmet UI is actually going to create those blinders. So you can feel like you're wearing a helmet, and that the player will look around, and whenever they move their head, they will not actually move their character. They'll just be looking inside their helmet, which will just kind of fade to black, and that's one thing we want to test out.
We also experiment a lot with the snap rotation.
Yeah.
So you saw a smooth in that one, which is my preferred usage. However, we also have like a snapping, so you're only rotating a certain amount of degrees at a time, which definitely helps with that comfort level.
But yeah, it is something that's, that we have thought a lot about.
There are some papers that say that like having like at least like a little frame around the person's vision can help with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I noticed some of the puzzles were pretty high up.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you going to tackle like players that aren't as tall?
Yes, that's a great question. So this is something that's on the list to add in is recalibrating for your height. So like if I stand up and I'm ready to play, I hit both control sticks, and that will calibrate it to the correct height so I can access everything.
Okay.
Or if you want to play seated.
Oh, okay.
One of the objectives though is that when it pertains to the object interaction, one of the things we noticed is in a lot of VR games, if you drop something, it is really difficult to pick it up, and it really pulls you out of that immersion because you can't, the sensors can't see you. So we wanted to make sure that it's within that space and contain everything to the space of play and the sensors for the Oculus.
It looked like you had a couple issues reading depth in the demo. How do you plan to address that going forward?
Depth?
Depth.
Yep. For the
cryo chamber. And
for the cryo chamber?
There's a bit of
Yeah.
confusion with reading the
There's,
conductors.
yeah, well the laser actually helps a lot. Without the laser it's really difficult. Changing the player's perspective is something we had to work on too, because if you notice, the cryopods are actually sunk in halfway into the ground. So when they were removed, there will be like a hole in the ground where the pod was at. So that's one thing, is kind of changing the player's perspective, and it's not really indicative in the demo, but the lighting will help be able to guide that as well for the player.
We're also planning to have a grid system on the ground so that the laser points at the grid and it's easier to navigate the grid. So if you are having a red grid which has a faulty crosswalk, if you point your laser at that particular grid, it's easier to
Also, you're only seeing my left eye on there, so that's one of the things.
Oh.
I have both vision. I have two eye vision.
Yeah, go ahead.
So actually, one quick answer to that, it's actually been like heavily tested in a lot of scientific papers, whether or not your distance perception in a one-to-one virtual space is realistic. It's actually not. You actually often assume you're closer to things than you actually are. So like if there's a pole over there and I try to walk over there in a one-to-one virtual space, I will misjudge that distance and be like short on that. One thing you mentioned was IK, like adding IK so that the arms look a little more realistic. One question I have about that is, one, do you think you would, like, which version of IK do you think would be best for that? And then two, wouldn't that break the player out of the experience? Say if I go to reach out like this and then do this, would the IK be able to solve for my elbows going this way, or would they just go down?
We've tested one IK so far. It's been fairly within the limited scope that we've tested it out in. It's been actually pretty good. In terms of the player, matching the movements, that's something that IK has been better at over the years, but it still can break the player's immersion. We need to play test it ultimately and take it to our target audience and say, would you prefer to see just floating hands? Does that break your immersion, or does the IK aspect that you might see your elbow twist around in weird, funky ways break the immersion more? But that is something. The magnet hands, though, as it pertains to the space, we incorporated haptic feedback. So when you go and you hit your magnet hand against a wall, your controller actually vibrates, so you actually feel like you're hitting stuff, and you can actually push off from the wall. So those same type considerations would have to be with the IK as well.
Last question.
What's the last question?